Welcome back. Next up is the first of 3 panel discussions today. This panel is supported by Export Development Canada. So thank you, EDC, for highlighting this crucial topic. ESG and sustainability, what's the difference? And why should Nova Scotia businesses care about this? For decades, experts have told us that the path we are on is not sustainable. And although we know that we are making strides in the right direction, we're faced with the reality that we can't pretend that the climate crisis or the drive to a more inclusive society, amongst many other challenges, are behind us. As a refresher, ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance, and is rooted in disclosure and the measurement of risk and return, both financial and more broadly as well. Much like what we heard from Azim in the keynote earlier, one of the silver linings of the global pandemic is that it has reframed our thinking. What was previously thought was impossible was suddenly, out of necessity, possible. Virtual work, empty highways, clear blue skies in cities around the globe, just to name a few. So where do we go from here? Why are ESG considerations becoming so important to business success here in Nova Scotia and around the world? Today, we have a panel of ESG and sustainability experts ready to unpack these goals. They'll help us better understand how putting ESG and sustainability at the core of your business is more than just the right thing to do for our planet and society, but it's the right business decision to make to ensure long-term prosperity and success. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. Justine Hendricks, Chief Sustainability Officer for Export Development Canada. In May 2019, Justine was named Senior Vice President, Sustainable Business and Enablement, and as of May 2021, is EDC's first Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer. She leads her team at EDC to put sustainable business principles and practices into every transaction. Welcome. Next, we have Nancy Foran, President and founder of ESG Partners. Through ESG Partners, Nancy provides guidance to companies, investors, and leadership teams as they incorporate ESG factors into their organizational strategies and define their path to purpose toward creating long-term sustainable value. And our third panelist is Marc, founder and CEO of Smallfood, Inc. Marc is a lifelong serial entrepreneur and a world-renowned expert on omega-3. Marc believes that to safeguard future generations, we need an immediate shift to a transformative economy centered around environmental sustainability and the collective well-being for our global community. Welcome to all of you. I'm so pleased to start this discussion. So let's dive right in. Marc, let's start with you. As a business owner and exporter, you've seen firsthand how consumer behavior values companies are using sustainable practices. In fact, you've prioritized sustainability in founding your companies. Tell us about developing your vision for sustainability in your businesses, and give us some insight as to how and what our audience needs to know to get started.
Well, thank you so much. It's nice to be here, Laurel, and really excited to kind of share the stage with Justine and Nancy. I think I'm going to learn a lot on this panel, so but hopefully I can share some things of value as an entrepreneur, working in this space. So the first thing is, why should we care? Why did I care? Why should Smallfood, care about ESG and sustainability? Well, sometimes the answer is obvious, and sometimes it's less obvious. One thing I think we all have to realize as SMEs, we are the driving force of the Canadian economy. We represent 70% of the Canadian economy. Yet, a lot of the attention around ESG and sustainability sits more in the large public, corporations. That's going to change, and it is changing. So one of the reasons why we need to be thinking this way is future compliance. It's coming, and so you really have to get ready for it now. The other thing is, the sustainability of your business is going to get disrupted by climate change. This is such a real, it's an existential threat, not just for humanity and for our economies. So, we need to do the responsible thing. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that ESG sustainability is about data. It's about data that can help us to make better strategic decisions for our business. Really good insights. It helps us to really understand, are we making ethical decisions in our business? And these things are really important to, not just the internal individuals within the business, but all your external stakeholders. Okay? Certainly your employees care about this. your suppliers care about this. Sometimes you won't even get on the shelf, if you're trying to sell a product, if you're not meeting certain standards. So Smallfood really started with that kind of notion, is like, we need to fundamentally change as a business. And certainly what we do as the core of our business is tackling, one of the major pillars of climate change, which is reducing the carbon intensivity of food production, and the reduction of natural resource utilization. But then you have to envelop that into this whole kind of measurement model. How are we operating? How are we making decisions? How is that impacting the environment? So for me, as kind of like this lifelong entrepreneur and learning all these hard lessons along the way, I thought this is a really great opportunity with Smallfood to really rethink the model. And I think what's so important for the world right now is to shift away from this hyper-competitive model more into hyper-collaboration. We need to go from this linear perspective to circularity, right? And so I really believe strongly in building ecosystems within, businesses. Like, how can you use nature as the model? I think nature has all the answers for us. When you think of, we can go in nature and we can find lots of examples of competition. It's just the nature of life sometimes. What's really, really fascinating though, are these complex, diverse, inclusive ecosystems, natural ecosystems, where the relationships are now more predicated on reciprocity and synergy, right, versus competition. And so what happens is the collective is allowed to thrive. You have so much more productivity within these kind of diverse ecosystems than you would in other examples. And I think that is the model that we really have to deploy, in business today, whether you're a small, medium, or large, corporation. And so Smallfood really set out with this, in mind. And I think it is such a great mantra for every business to start to think about. It's like, how can we see acceleration through collaboration? Because I think it's so possible. And in developing these kind of more shared capital models, and there's so many different forms of capital that we can kind of leverage and be more better asset and resource allocations. So moving the world together, forward as kind of more with an ecocentric approach.
Thanks, Marc. Great way to kick us off, thinking about a new thought process with respect to what is value, more than financial value, a more looking at many, many aspects. I want to bring Nancy in now. Marc talked about some of the standards, the measurement that's coming on board, and you're an expert in accounting standards, and you have credentials with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, and you support your clients to build ESG factors into their strategies. So help us understand how sustainability is being measured, and share with us some of the biggest considerations and hurdles that your clients are facing in trying to bring this into their business model.
For sure. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. Like Marc, I think I'm going to learn a lot from all of you. So thank you for the opportunity. So I guess if we look at sustainability itself, it refers to a company's efforts to reduce its impacts on the world around it. So creating good jobs, promoting gender equality, helping the environment. But often companies struggle to really get their arms around these broader concepts, like, social, environmental, economic impacts. How do we look at it? How do we measure it? And this is where ESG, as a lens, if you will, has been so helpful. And as Marc had said, it's a lot about data. It's a more specific data-driven approach to focus on the 3 ESG dimensions. So to focus on environmental, social, and governance, and to be able to offer frameworks or a framework to measure and track performance, to assess and price risk, and to demonstrate value beyond just the financial value, which is what we had been focused on so much, before now. And to be able to talk about sustainability issues or ESG issues in a strategic way, so we can assess the financial impacts of those issues. We hear this all the time. You manage what you measure. And it really is all about measuring performance so you can manage what matters most. So in order for organizations, we hear a lot as well about social license to operate. we can no longer, well, I guess a different way to put it is society is no longer supporting organizations who just give the promise of adopting sustainable practices. It really is now about actions and results. And even this conversation, we're hearing so much around the commitment to net zero by 2050. Great commitment, but what are you doing to get there? So without clear actions, without the ability to track and measure and disclose and report, it really does boil down to this concept around greenwashing, suggesting that you're doing more than what you're actually doing just to be seen as green in the eyes of your stakeholders. And this is where the standards help. So Laurel, you had mentioned about the standards. To help measure ESG performance, to measure and quantify sustainability efforts, there are a number of standards and frameworks around. It is a very busy space. I won't kid you. You hear a lot about the different acronyms, alphabet soup, all these sort of terms being thrown around. But there is a lot of streamlining happening. There is a lot of efficiencies coming together as how we can actually start to approach a commonality towards standards and frameworks. And it's, at the end of the day, it's trying to streamline the process to add clarity on the key issues that need to be tracked, measured, and reported on. And those are the issues that will ultimately have a financial impact on the organization. So it's about helping to evaluate and improve performance around environmental, social, and governance issues, and to provide that consistent, comparable, reliable data set and reporting. At the end of the day, it's really about creating and assessing the long-term value of an organization, to assess those risks that are present today and may become relevant in the future. I think Marc Harney is the first person I heard say this in the most articulate way, but you can no longer use the past to predict the future. So we need new tools to focus on what we need to measure and how we can manage that. We traditionally have been looking at this through a financial only lens, and now we know that that just doesn't go far enough. We need the right tools to give us the right ability to look through a new lens, to look beyond today. And that means focusing on financial and sustainability performance. And again, we need those tools for both. So the biggest hurdles being faced by companies, I say the biggest one, and this kind of goes into what Marc was saying too, it's the challenges that our privately held companies here in this part of Canada, in this part of the world, it's the challenge that they have around benchmarking. It's it's one thing to be able to measure your improvements over time. You know, here's where you were yesterday, here's where you are today, here's where you want to be tomorrow. But how do you know if that's sufficient? How do you know how you're performing against your peers? How do you know if you're focusing on the right things? If you're privately held, access to ESG data and information can be more challenging as opposed to, public companies, which are required to disclose certain information and is publicly available. And also, there are rating agencies that will actually rate and score your ESG performance, amongst your industry, amongst your peers. But again, they tend to focus on those larger publicly traded companies. So that's one issue. Data, and this was mentioned before, data is another one. There is an increasingly massive amount of data that's being accumulated. And it's both for public and private companies. But how do you get your arms around it? How do you track it? How do you make sense of it? And how do you make sure that it can be verified and externally verified? A lot of conversation going around auditing and getting assurance around sustainability information that's coming out there. So how we track and measure data is going to become very important. And another hurdle, as I just mentioned, it's around knowing what information is material or important. And so what's important to one company may not be important to another. At the end of the day, it's not always easy. There's difficult conversations that need to happen internally and externally, but don't let that stop you from getting started.
Nancy, that was a great overview. And I really want to bring Justine in because I know from having had a pre-discussion with Justine, she is ready to talk about those difficult conversations and has had them with companies and her own team and looking at, what Export Canada is seeing businesses have to address to stay competitive in the long term on a global scale. So Justine, jump in.
Yeah, no, thanks, Laurel. And similar to Nancy and Marc, really happy to be here today with everybody. So maybe before I jump into what those hurdles are, let me give you a couple of statistics, right, that I think will reinforce what my fellow panelists have been in terms of the importance of ESG for all businesses. And I love what you said, Marc, in terms of the importance of the small and medium businesses contributing to Canada's overall success as an economy. So First off, 83% of C-suite leaders say that they expect that ESG programs will continue to contribute more shareholder value in 5 years than they do today. So that's one to remember. And the other one is C-suite leaders and investment professionals are willing to pay up to 10% premium to acquire a company with a positive record for ESG rather than a negative record. So where that connects to kind of Nancy and Marc is that, being able to articulate what your track record has been on ESG, on the ESG journey, is becoming increasingly important, not just from a shareholder value, but also recognizing the impact that you have through the business activities that you perform. So if I put my exporter lens on and some of the conversations we've been having at EDC, I would share with you that when we do our own due diligence in terms of supporting a company through the various products and services we have for exporting, I would say that, maybe 5-6 years ago, the bulk of our assessment was on credit, right? The ability to repay or what was the risk related to that. We always had an ESG component to it, but today it's a 50-50 split. So just that alone gives you a sense of how the importance of understanding ESG risk vis-a-vis your business is taking on in terms of our assessment and the ability of our company's success internationally. We certainly see a couple of things for you to consider because, as all of us are embarking on this journey, I'm the first to recognize it can be very overwhelming, right? So when you start from the top, and Laurel said, like, this is what ESG covers. I think under the E, the S, the G, there's probably at least 20 or 25 categories each of consideration. So I guess the first advice I would share with you is, taking that list and actually look at what you do today, right? Because I think sometimes we right away start from the perception of a deficit and we're at day zero. But there's a lot of activities and good activities if I think around, your hiring practices, work and safety measures, how if you have a board, how you govern and how those decisions are made, that sometimes just going through the exercise of documenting them and placing them under the ESG category is a bit of a sigh of relief, if I could say. And believe it or not, I even had to do it for EDC overall, right? So we're going through the same thing at a larger scale because we too are subject to having to better articulate how we're performing against ESG measures. So start by looking at what you do today. And make sure it's documented. And I think Nancy certainly, in terms of some of those standards, is able to get some guidance on that. Then once you're able to better understand that, you can say, okay, there is a lot of information by sector in terms of what should be some of those benchmarks you want to aim for. And recognizing that that all of them are not equal, but at least to be able to see where you want to address yourself or put yourself towards, so that you can then set up a plan to better understand what is it going to take to get there. And I'd say the last part about it is you want to be able to measure the outcome, right? So if you start from a certain point in time and then you say, by the end of this year, we want to be able to, improve our employee practices, you have to be able to articulate what that looks like. And I'm sure as many of you, it's sometimes easy to articulate what we would want to achieve, but the actual measure that can best describe it is often where the bulk of the conversation takes place. So that, to me, I would say, Laurel and team is really important as a starting point. But how does it get you to the export is that if you actually look at really neat opportunities that are emerging, and I would put out there that in terms of innovation, problems we need to solve, not just at a global scale, this is by far perhaps one of the biggest innovation opportunities we've ever seen. And Canada should go and take its share, right? And Canada's got lots of innovation to offer. So what's important with that, though, is as you put your face towards the outside world and these opportunities, is to also recognize that their regulatory requirements are changing, and a lot of them are related to ESG. So if you want to have your piece of the pie, and we certainly see it as it can be an accelerator actually to your success. So the sooner you are able to articulate that, the more opportunities actually are going to come your way.
Great. Thanks, Justine. And I saw you, Marc, nodding to a lot of the things Justine was saying, and want to pick up on that opportunities, that it is an opportunity, because I think you built your businesses on that opportunity. So I want you to talk about that. And then I want you to dig into the S a little bit. We have an ESG. I want to talk about the S, because I think sometimes the S is the forgotten cousin of this discussion. So Marc, can I throw those questions over to you to expand a little bit?
Yes, of course. Well, like I was saying earlier, for me as an entrepreneur, it's been a learning journey the whole time. I think in my previous chapters, I just tried to do the right thing, but there wasn't the support, there wasn't the tools, there wasn't the knowledge. We did some great things, but there's just so many blind spots. And I think what we're doing now is like all businesses have to work towards figuring out, mapping, where they're at, how are they impacting the E, the S, the G, and, building a roadmap towards, a vision, a target. And I think companies will get so many more points in terms of, the audience they speak to by just being transparent, being honest, versus being perfect, because everyone is really, people get it, this incremental change. Stepping into Smallfood, there was this great opportunity certainly to have a huge impact on, how animal agriculture is impacting, emissions and resource utilization. That's great. So you have all these big engineering models already mapped out. We have tons and tons of data, but that's just one facet of it. And I think, once again, knowing there's always these kind of blind spots, we had to kind of take a step back and say, okay, from an operational perspective, what is meaningful to us? What's material to us, to our stakeholders? What is the real vision? What is success? How are we going to measure success? Certainly, we know that we need to get to net zero and, climate stability. But the social justice piece is so critical, because I don't think we're ever going to get to where we want to unless we bring everyone forward together. And so it's great that we pay more attention, equal attention to the S. That is an integral part of sustainability. And I think what's happened in the past couple of years has really been an eye-opener for so many individuals and corporations, organizations, that there's a lot of blind spots. And the diversity and inclusivity, just even when you start to do mapping your supply chains. I have to plug in hold on a second.
Well, maybe Marc, let's pull Nancy in here for a second, because I saw you nodding, Nancy, about you must talk to your clients about these exact things, the E, S, and the G. How do they tackle this, and what are the considerations?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. One of the most significant considerations that always comes to the forefront is managing the changing expectations of society and investors and a host of the other, so many other stakeholders. So, and increasingly, and I think Marc and Justine had said this as well, is if companies are not being seen as embracing environmental, social, and governance issues as core priorities to the business, it will result in negative consequences, from the inability to attract talent, which we heard about in the opening session, with our minister, to attract talent, and also to attract investment to these new organizations that are coming, or organizations that are looking to transition to the low carbon economy. And there's also the financial impacts of climate change and the reputational risks that go along with all of, with not being seen as embracing ESG. And also some considerations for companies, and Marc had mentioned this as well, is being ready for those anticipated regulatory changes. And we expect to see those mostly around the disclosure around climate-related issues. So, hopefully, many of you here have heard about, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or the TCFD. It is becoming the global standard for corporations and organizations to disclose their climate impacts and how they're going about managing it and governing it and reporting on it. It's been endorsed by the G7, by the G20, more than 2,200 organizations at last count. And it is coming into, or it has been brought into legislation in countries like the UK and New Zealand. US is working on it, as is Canada. And so this is one of those areas where regulation is really important to move the needle and address some of the issues that Marc has just been raising.
Great.
And
Marc, plugged in again. Maybe I can, you can finish your thought and then I'll jump to Justine. I'm just watching our clock tick down and down, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover this. So Marc, finish your thought and then I'll come to you, Justine. Yeah, sorry, I was losing power.
Yeah, so that's great, kind of to play off of Nancy there. You know, it's you know, your disclosures, you know, within the, you know, the social part of it are becoming just as important. But once again, like the big question for, you know, SMEs is like, this is a complex domain. You know, you're an SME, so it's like, you know, there's a knowledge gap. There are not tools today that are there to really support you. You may not feel you have the resources to even do this kind of work. You know, so the world has to really work together to bring these tools into place. But we knew kind of with Smallfood, we need to start doing some of this now. So we worked with sustainability experts or ESG experts at the University of Waterloo to start to distill down, you know, these big global reporting standards, which are so overwhelming, and like 400 or 500 different indicators. Like, they have teams and teams of people that do this all day long. But you may be an organization of 4, 5, 10 people. So, but for us, it was an essential tool to distill that down to what are the most important things that as our organization, we feel that we need to report on, not just E and not just G, but the S as well, right? Because there you start to kind of remove the blind spots and you can start to implement process and measures to hold yourself accountable, to communicate what's important to all of your stakeholders. And so that was really a key project over the last 2 years. It was actually quite a large project. And, you know, so we're at the stage right now where we're starting to kind of just implement that.
Thank you, Marc. Justine, jump in. You talk to so many companies, and EDC, like NSBI, we work with so many companies. How do you begin the dialogue with them and talk about, you know, it was great advice. Look at what you're already doing. But then how do you talk about where are they going? And that this is a constantly evolving area of what are the considerations of value and risk.
Yeah, no, thanks. And maybe let me try to pick up on what Marc and Nancy said and tie all of this together, right? So you're right, Laurel. I commented on, you know, start with what you know, and you know, kind of familiarize yourself with that. Then you open yourself onto the world, which gets us to, as Marc was talking, supply chains, right? So on the good news is, you know, similar industries have, you know, tend to have similar issues. And there are tools, and I understand as part of this panel, we'll make sure that some of these tools are made available that can help you actually identify or align yourself based on your industry. What could some of be those issues you want to look out for from a supply chain point of view, right? So typically it's a combination of your industry, your sector, obviously, and also the geography. So the geography can add a big component to that. I'll take, you know, the example that I think all of us all remember is, you know, the scandal around Joe Fresh, right? Where here's an apparel industry, a tragedy happens in a foreign market, and just sheds a light on labor issues or human rights issues. And that's the S that Marc is talking about, right? We might be benefiting from a really cool t-shirt at a certain price, but how did that t-shirt get made, and what was the impact? And I'd push it even a little bit further than that. I loved the fact that we're intertwining or connecting E, S, and G, because if you take a step back and you actually look at how we're trying to solve for the environment right now, it's, you know, we need to do it, but wouldn't it be tragic if it was at the expense of people, right? So like it's so that balance of right to wrong is really important. So to me, what you want to do as the first step is actually understand your supply chain, right? Like and again, there are tools for that we're going to share, so that you can start to be able to see where could be those possible risks, right? So you could have a risk due to the environment, right? So with the changes of climate, some of the inputs into your supply chain could be adversely impacted. What would you do if that was to happen? And we all know that those environmental impacts are accelerating, right? So that's an example of something that you want to think through. Certainly from a labor perspective, child labor and things like that, you want to understand in particular jurisdictions whether that risk exists. And once you do, is what are some of the mitigants that you can put in place, right? Thinking through, do I have a policy on how I want to handle that? What are some of the expectations I'm going to ask of the suppliers I deal with in order to understand, where things are coming from and where they're going into the chain? Those are just a couple. Another one would be corruption and bribery, right? Different jurisdictions, you want to understand and have that necessary background on how those suppliers are working. And I would also argue, Laurel, it's one thing to do it at the onset, but probably the monitoring is by far the most important factor, right? You don't do it once, you need to keep on going. Maybe last, because I know we want to continue with the conversation is, I guess, I'll put my EDC hat on for a second. As we're looking at these different transactions, and I do want to stress, regardless of size, so it's not about a size. For us, it's once we connect with an exporter, it's to try to meet them where they are, right? And we've got lots of stories where, given a sector, a jurisdiction, we started our due diligence, identified there might have been a gap, and what we look to do is to work with the company to breach that gap, and then year over year evolve it. It's important, I think, to share with the audience. You won't solve everything today. It is about like how you progress over time, and as Marc and Nancy also alluded, is be transparent about it. I think maybe is the biggest change we've seen, perhaps in the last decade, in terms of being open and transparent about how your progress is going.
Great. Thanks, Justine. My folks are telling me we have 5 minutes left, so we're going to switch into a lightning round. And I have a question for each of you. And I know we're giving our audience lots to think about, but as Justine said, we're going to be posting a lot of content, a lot of information. So Marc, last question to you, about a minute to answer. If a company's been listening and they're interested in ESG and want to get started, what do you think is the critical first step that business can take?
Right. I think it all starts with, creating a sustainability vision and getting buy-in and alignment with your internal team. It's not a light undertaking. So you really have to have this as the collective effort. We're moving into the meaningful economy. So this is a way to really create engagement, stakeholder buy-in into your business. And then from that point on, because this is probably a complex domain, work with people like Nancy. You need an expert to come in and really help you understand this new lingo that you have to speak. Figure out what tools are available to you to make this a little bit easier. And most importantly, do everything in a transparent way. That's how you're going to build trust, in your marketplace and with your stakeholders.
Thanks, Marc. Nancy, over to you. 1 minute. What's the best piece of advice you have for businesses in Nova Scotia looking to take those first steps?
To get started. Don't let perfection, don't let getting it 100% right prevent you from getting started. It's like Marc said, just be transparent about where you are on the journey, what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, and your stakeholders will reward you for that. And through it all, keep that balanced perspective. And this has been mentioned before. Don't focus on climate at the expense of social and governance issues. Don't assume that a strong diversity, equity, and inclusion policy will allow you to be harming local water sources or the environment. It really is a three-legged stool. You got to focus on all three.
Thanks, Nancy. Great advice. Justine, last minute for you. What insight do you want to leave our businesses with from a global EDC perspective on this ever-increasing global focus on ESG?
Yeah, so I'll get right to the point, Laurel. To me, there's a huge opportunity for you to seize out there. Canada's got a lot to offer. We see ESG as actually an accelerator to your growth, right? So embracing it, and as Nancy and Marc said, you start small, start now. We're certainly here to help. And Canada's got a lot to offer, so go and seize it.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Justine, Nancy, Marc, for sharing your experience with us today. And to the audience, make sure you check out the trade show booths to access the tools that EDC and NSBI have to support you as you implement ESG strategies and sustainability practices. I'll leave you with a quote. It's not a new one. It's from Albert Einstein, but he once said, "The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking, and it cannot be changed without changing our thinking." So thanks to this panel today for joining us to help us change our collective thinking with regard to ESG and creating value over the long term. Thanks for all of you joining us today.
Thanks.
Thanks, Laurel.
So now to our audience, we have 3 different workshops coming up, and they will be running concurrently, and then we will repeat them later this morning. We've lined up some great presenters and presentations for you, and we hope that you'll leave with new learnings, practical resources, and the enthusiasm to put it all into practice. Enjoy the workshops.